starting to snow, so I don't know how long we're gonna stay out and deck dine, because it won't be that enjoyable, but I have a hot water bottle, so I'll be okay. I guess James will talk about those two. So we're gonna be talking about, well, if we get around to it, Foundations of Western Civilization 2. Just gonna leave that sitting down. And then James will talk about the Kill Team and Midway. And I'm going to talk about this one right now after we leave. It was different. It's a sci-fi thing, and it's about a guy who's going to go leave, or he has a visa to leave Earth, to live somewhere else. And it's kind of interesting. It's very different because it doesn't have special effects. So it's a very different kind of sci-fi than you would imagine. And I actually enjoyed it. It was kind of, I mean, he's searching for his wife, and for the longest time you're like, well, just, pick some other woman to pretend to be your wife and just go, And then, anyway, it's actually worth watching. I don't want to give it away. So, there you go. That's and James will talk about the Kill Team and Midway.
What is it? Oh yeah, the Kill Team. I didn't see much of that. Midway seemed to be pretty good. I guess Kill Team seemed bad by comparison. Not bad, but just kind of mediocre by comparison.
To Midway,
so if you're into the kind of stuff that who is it? Woody Harrelson and Dennis Quaid might be together. There's a lot of tough talk and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Although like it's former drama majors writing the dialogue, and you go, yeah, not that tough, But maybe I'm being a little unfair. Probably not. Anyway, I thought it was pretty well done, stuff like that. I think I didn't follow history that closely, but what can I say? And yes, spoiler alert: the Allies win, the Americans win, because it's basically made up on historical events. So yeah, the Americans win. Wow, what is that?
Beets and turmeric and carrot and ginger.
Okay, funny sort of consistency. Anyway, hopefully it goes down.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Beets are kind of thick. Anyway.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
I'm gonna get in on the Foundations of Western Civilization 2, and
so
James
who are we
can
starting
just
off
throw
with
in
here?
some comments
I'll try to
whenever
throw in
he
some
feels
stuff
like
from the
it.
peanut gallery.
Yeah. And he's eating cauliflower crust pizza.
There we go. See?
Anchovies, cabbage that we got for free off of the what is that salad? That chicken.
Yeah, whatever it was.
Whatever that
chicken
was.
salad.
Yeah. And so it doesn't have chicken in it because I washed the chicken off and gave that to the dogs.
Yeah.
And so we're giving that just in little bits as treats. And so he's eating the cabbage and the cheese on the pizza because that kit came with cheese too.
Oh.
And I put some shredded butternut squash on there.
Yeah, to make it look like cheese.
Yeah, but not that much actually.
Yeah.
And
well, it's actually a little bit better the way. I'm not a big fan of it.
I know you are.
Right, so.
And black olives and regular stuff. So I think it should be okay. I don't know. We'll find out. Well, he'll find out. I won't be eating it, so I don't care. But anyway, Castiglione and Machiavelli.
Castiglione.
Okay. And Machiavelli both wrote for their respective princes. Niccolo Machiavelli sought to advise the ruler himself in Il Principe, the prince.
Let me see. Principe, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Principe, maybe a
That's what it
principe.
would be.
I think it's principe, which does mean the prince.
Written
You see how
in
it's related to principle?
1513, but published only
Posthumously. So I think humus related to humus. It really means burial, right? After burial.
Lucky thing I have James here today.
Well, I could be
In
wrong about that.
1532. To stay in power, the prince would have to become adept at seeming to be and do good while actually doing whatever it takes to enhance his power. A medieval king had to answer. I'm on lecture 5 now. A medieval king had to answer to or balance quite a few groups in the great chain of being. First, he was subordinate to God and his angels. Medieval kings created, enriched, and empowered nobles in order to have an army. Nobles often used their lands and wealth they produced to build up independent power. Medieval rulers won support from nobles and the church by exempting them from taxation. Overtaxing towns would kill the economies. Henry VIII, having taken over the church in England, confiscated much of its land. Henry, instead of using those lands to endow the monarchy for centuries, Henry then traded long-term security for quick cash by selling these lands to nobles and gentry. Beginning with Louis the 12th. No. Yep. It's got to be a 12.
Okay. Yep.
I didn't think there were that many Louis. Anyway.
Well, it got up to 18.
The
The
kings
17th
of France
never
sold government
ruled.
offices. So, yeah, it's funny because James was just telling me yesterday that we have in Alberta here, we have right-wing government in power, which is typical, actually, here.
Yeah, it's been that way since 1935.
So,
With a 4-year exception.
and so they came into power and this last election, and the
Came back
NDP
into
had
power.
been in power. But anyway, so James was telling me that they're going to sell off 24 of the provincial parks.
I'm not sure what they're going to do. I suspect it's going to be a sell-off.
Yeah, well,
I think it's
closing.
10 right now, and maybe 10 more down the pike.
Which is funny because
20
you
or
know
so.
that it's just some of their, friends of the party, people that
See, that's so kind.
that are
See, Pauline is kind.
Yes.
Cronies.
Yes.
And we're both being kind because
Yeah.
we could use 4-letter words. to
that
describe
are wanting to buy those parks, and it's kind of ridiculous. What do you do, right? Anyway. Spanish kings pressured the Portuguese to expel their Jews and Moors, a mistake that destroyed much of the old Portuguese middle class. Most educated Europeans did not believe that the earth was flat. A population of perhaps 50 million in 1492 would sink to 5 million by 1700. We're talking about the bubonic plague now, I think. Anyway, Spain and Portugal began to import slaves culled from Africa. Eventually, some 10 million people were abducted, sold, transported, worked, often to death in the New World. Spain, the dominant power in Europe for 150 years. New World silver did nothing for the Spanish people, apart from merchants in Seville. These settlements did not result in tremendous wealth, but they supplied France with furs and pelts and Grand Banks fishing. So the settlements of in like Canada and stuff, right?
There are hardly any French people in Canada.
Yeah.
So this guy gets it right. Like people who say European opulence and power was generated from the New World are they're off by centuries, really. It was hardly anything came from the New World. This guy's right about the Grand Banks. They got fish from there, but the story goes that maybe the Basques already knew about the Grand Banks. That's not the same thing as taking over land and killing off people and stuff like that. So
Massachusetts Bay colonists who came for economic opportunity chafed under the intolerant religious regime. Rather, these settlements existed to provide a refuge for those Puritans who could not conform to the Church of England. Puritan intolerance eventually drove a Salem clergyman named Roger Williams to found Rhode Island as a haven for a wider variety of Protestants as well as Jews. And I didn't know about that. I didn't know about the Jews. Anyway, in 1632, George Calvert, Lord Baltimore, a Catholic, founded Maryland, which eventually became a haven for Catholics. And I knew about that from James. In the end, the English colonies of the New World provided limited commercial or military value. These colonies were an increasingly important safety valve for the people who could neither abide nor prosper in Anglican village society. They provide an alternative to the poor law for indigent Englishmen. The great trading nation in the 17th century was increasingly the Dutch, which I didn't know. The Dutch East India Company, chartered in 1602, established trading colonies in the Moluccas, or Spice Islands.
That's in Indonesia now.
And in 1619 founded Batavia, now Jakarta, in Western Java.
Batavia. It's a weird name, right? It's basically, I think, the Roman name for part of present-day Holland.
A Dutch West Indian Company established in 1621 sponsored colonies in West Indies at Curacao.
Curacao, so that's from the north coast of South America.
Later, Saint Martin, North America.
Saint Martin. I'm not sure where that is. I think it's in that same area.
At New Amsterdam in 1624 and Pernambuco, Brazil. I don't know where that is. Anyway, in 1630. In 1654, the Portuguese drove the Dutch from Brazil, and in 1664, the Dutch lost New Amsterdam to the British, who renamed it New York. The failure of the Germans to engage in the great game of European imperialism until the 19th century had far-reaching consequences: imperial poverty, powerlessness, and Protestantism. From 1295, the Roman Church decreed that Jews should wear badges. Oh, I'm on lecture 7 now. Christians were forbidden from lending money at interest, so Jews found a niche as bankers and moneylenders.
I just want to say how late that thing is about
Okay.
the wearing badges.
That's 1295.
Mm-hmm.
So Christianity had been around almost 1,300 years.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be interesting to see who started having Jews wear badges.
I know. Yeah, I already know.
That's for
So that's-
home research.
That's for home
Who
research.
actually started it
So,
and when.
yeah, it is good to note that date, 1295, and just then they're getting them to wear badges.
That's
so where
pretty
did it
late.
come from?
Well,
You have to look into it,
Yeah.
and when you do, then you know.
yeah.
So anyway,
Find out where iconoclasm, when it really got started, who originated that. It was in Judaism. And, it's always been a strain in Christianity, but when it got really serious in Christianity, it was an import from somewhere else.
so
Anyway.
Jews were expelled from England in 1290 from France in 1306 and again in 1394. And it's actually good to look at those dates too.
Okay, what were those ones?
England in 1290,
Yeah.
France in 1306, and then again in 1394.
Wow, they're kind of clustered there, aren't they?
Yeah. In Germany, not a unified country until after the early modern period, the situation varied from place to place. Medieval Spain had been very tolerant of both Jews and Muslims, but as we have seen, Isabella and Ferdinand harried them out of the country. Many fled to Portugal, but in 1497, Manuel I decided on forced conversions, causing many to leave for Greece and North
So
Africa.
that tolerant thing about Spain is what left-wingers call a narrative, but they always call it when it's Donald Trump and stuff like that. It's always about right-wingers telling stories, but left-wingers are telling stories there. So here's Moses Maimonides, who's supposed to be, he's Moses, he's a Jew. He was in this tolerant Spain, and he eventually fled, and here's what he said. A particular group that was supposed to have been very tolerant there had treated the Jews the worst they'd ever been treated. Now we can argue about whether he's right, whether he was overstating the case, but he wouldn't have thought it was tolerant because he's saying this particular group in this particular area. We'll say it's in this particular area. Interpret it that way. Were meaner to the Jews than the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. And that's saying a lot. He might have been overstating the case, as I said, but that is saying a lot. So using Moses Maimonides as an example of tolerance is actually I think he might be rolling over in his grave if such a thing is physically possible. So I think it's a fiction.
From the 13th century, there was in many parts of Europe the Inquisition, which took heresy evidence, encouraged neighbors to inform on neighbors, and used torture to ferret out people who did not agree with Orthodox Catholicism. Galileo.
It was started in Spain, but funny enough, if you check it out, not by the Christians. They eventually adopted it, but that was like 200 years after it was instituted. So Christians, it's a bad idea to have forced conversions, but that applies to every belief system, not just religions. Forced conversions are a bad idea because it eventually brings in Inquisition, because people don't, people who are doing the converting just don't believe in the legit or the honesty of the conversions.
All right, Galileo. He had some different ideas for the time. The surface of the moon is pitted, cratered, and irregular. The surface of the sun is marked by spots. The
He
planet
could see
Jupiter
it through
is moon,
telescopes.
moons of its own, implying that it was a model for the solar system and the Earth's relationship to the moon. Venus has phases.
Yeah. In other words, like the moon. He actually saw it in a telescope, right?
Johannes Kepler.
You'd say that, Johannes.
Oh, yeah.
It's easy for me because I was raised around some Dutch people, well, Afrikaners.
He refined the Copernican system, but with the elliptical.
Oh, he refined it. What he did was so incredible. You know, like he actually was using equations and stuff like that. He figured it out mathematically. And he also has a way of explaining, or at least
I didn't know he was a Protestant.
Kepler. I believe he was. I think Tycho Brahe was a Danish guy. Kepler would be probably Lutheran or something like that. I think he was German. But yeah, he figured out that the planets actually, during part of their orbit, go faster, and then part of the orbit slower, and he was able to come up with an equation to explain it, which is pretty amazing. Yeah?
And then, so I'm on page 58-59 here, and I guess he talks about the scientific method and inductive methods there, if you're interested.
Very important, actually, but I don't know whether I can't recall whether he did a great job.
No, well, it's a history thing. So whatever. Newton developed the calculus. Newton published his findings in 1687. The Principia
is how I say it.
Newton and his colleagues were not atheists. Thomas Hobbes wrote the Leviathan.
That comes from the Hebrew. It means some sort of I believe it's a sea beast or something like that. It's related to Lotan, I think was kind of like a
How's that
Phoenician
pizza?
beast.
Pretty dried out? I mean, it was waiting for you for a long time.
Yeah, I'm loving it, so
Okay.
I'm just feasting on it right now.
James's Scottish heritage was difficult to stomach for his English subjects. Oh, we're talking about King James the
We're not talking about
Sixth.
James here, because I have no subjects. I am somewhat Scottish.
No, page 71. James's informal, unconventional personal behavior contrasted with the Tudors. James was not in control. James was not wealthy. James did not have an army. This was fine with James because, unusually for a king, he sought to be a rex pacificus,
Oh, that's
A peaceful
interesting.
king.
Yeah.
who would heal the religious and diplomatic rifts that tore Europe. This peace policy was unpopular, especially with the Puritans. Wild, hey? Charles
well,
was...
Puritans, there's a reason why we say someone's puritanical, right? They tend not to be very tolerant. There's a lot of Puritanism, actually. I'm not the only one to notice it in left-wing circles nowadays. Yeah.
Charles was no better at dealing with Parliament than his father had been. Parliament, so we're talking about Charles I now. Parliament tried and convicted him on a charge of high treason in 1649. The king was publicly executed on 30th January 1649, and the way he writes his date makes me think he must be French, eh?
What?
The instructor, well, he puts the 31st. I like that format, actually, but it's a French
30?
thing, isn't it?
Where
Yeah,
is it?
putting the number first, and then the month, and then yeah. Anyway.
I like that. That's the way I,
do.
write
It's
it.
I
It's the
prefer that
sensible one.
format. It makes sense.
Yeah.
The English people had judicially and publicly murdered their king.
Murdered. No. They executed him.
They executed him.
I mean, he would have killed people, so...
The Baptists or Dippers believed in baptism. And the baptism should be delayed until adulthood. The Seekers actually went from congregation to congregation, seeking a permanent home. And my dad did that when we were young. But I don't know that he would have...
Thought himself as a seeker?
But the Diggers believed that Christ wanted property to be shared in common. The Ranters believed that nothing was a sin unless one conceived it to be a sin. The Quakers believed that all people contained God's inner light in equal measure, implying that a peasant was as good as a lord, a woman as good as a man. The Muggletonians believed that a tailor from West Country was the last prophet named in the Revelation.
I presume
I
his
had
name
never
is
heard of those guys.
Muggleton.
Wild, hey? Yeah.
I love that name. I've never heard of him.
Fifth monarchy men believed that Bible had foretold 5 great monarchies on earth. 4 had already fallen. Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. The 5th was to be the kingdom of King Jesus, and the Commonwealth was only an interim arrangement to be brought into conformity with Mosaic law. Okay, so I'm now on page 89. Louis seemed to be able to raise... Oh boy. Louis the what?
Is that the
Where
12?
am I? Maybe. Seemed to be able to raise these funds easily because he had no parliament with which to deal. Rather, he
probably
simply
Louis
taxed
the
the French.
14th.
Okay.
He was in for over 70 years, I think. And he was the pivotal ruler of France.
See, I've just highlighted some parts, and I'm
Yeah.
hoping James will fill it in when it doesn't make sense. In 1694, Montagu sponsored the Bank of England. The result was a financial revolution. Created a new class of wealthy investors, moneyed men, who made their fortunes out of credit, not land or goods. They made money off money.
Yeah.
Caribbean sugar, followed by American tobacco, furs and salt, fish, Indian silks, dyes and spices, Portuguese Madeira and port wine, Spanish oranges, figs and raisins, Italian olives and silks, and Middle Eastern coffee. So there was a lot of trade going on. Metal goods and textiles to Africa. They traded with African chiefs for captives, sold to a West Indian sugar grower or American tobacco grower. The tobacco and sugar was shipped to London, Bristol, Liverpool, Glasgow, or other ports. From there, these products were sent into the interior or onto Europe. In 1719, oh dear. Lecture, I'm supposed to read lecture 13 notes first, and I don't know where I've put them. Here we go. The 9 Years' War and the War of Spanish Succession were about ideas. Absolution versus constitutionalism, Catholicism versus Protestantism.
That would be, I think, absolutism. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Or religious uniformity versus religious toleration. The next 3, the War of the Australian Succession.
That would be Austrian succession.
Yep, that's what it was. The 7 Years' War and the
I'm not
American
sure if
Revolutionary
Australia
War.
discovered
Even it
quite
existed
better.
yet. No, well, it existed. Not as
Yeah.
Australia, though. Okay. the American Revolutionary War were less about ideas. They were more about land and trade, especially overseas trade, and about wealth, taxation.
That would be about
The
taxation.
last two wars, the French Revolutionary was, and the Napoleonic Wars, would be about ideas again: egalitarianism versus privilege, rationalism versus tradition, nationalism versus imperialism, centralization and romanticism versus rationalism. First two about Europe emerging from the Middle Ages. 9 Years' War, French side, no allies. 17th century wars ruined Dutch agriculture. Ireland Penal Code prevented Catholic Irish from voting, from holding office, from sitting in Parliament, from attending a university, from practicing law, from purchasing land, from inheriting it from Protestants, bearing arms or wealth, wearing a sword, a sign of gentility, or owning a horse worth over £5. They were forced by law to divide their bequeathed amongst their heirs, partible inheritance, thus guaranteeing that the Catholic estates would be small and the small estates couldn't compete with the larger ones, so this would lead to their elimination. By 1727, the Catholic majority, amounting to 4/5 the population, owned only 1/7 of the land in Ireland. Hume's ideas kept him out of universities. Rousseau, noble savage, influenced Montessori schools, believed that local communities should hold power, the whole system should fall. Rousseau was notorious for his love of many women. Rousseau trusts nature.
I don't think it was love. So
No. New World idealism. Start from scratch. Go back to nature. He encourages self-discovery. Freedom of expression as opposed to memorization. People should live in small states and policy... The will of the people, a form of democracy. Simple rule can lead to tyranny. And I want to mention that about Rousseau. And about people who... There's a lot of people who present themselves as really open-minded, free thinkers, you know, and they're really tolerant of other cultures and stuff like that. And really, a lot of them, I have found, a lot of them are not at all. They're not at all. It's, they're out for their own best interest, and it's not, it doesn't help the cultures that they're claiming to be big fans of or whatever. It's themselves, you know. So, and a lot of them, when they're men, like a lot of artists, fine artists, are out, you know, loving many women.
spread the love around.
And it's not love,
here's
and
the
it's
deal.
not good for the women. It's actually, it's sexism. It's really awful. It's abusive, actually.
So yeah, charity, and charity
I
in this case
shouldn't
is
speak
kind
more
of
about
like
that.
Greek love, but you know, not the Rousseau type of love. Begins at home. If you want to be someone who frees people up, you don't go around exploiting women like Rousseau did.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to my other notes because those don't make sense right now. So, in 1719, Orleans attempted to bring the financial revolution to France by embracing the scheme of a Scottish speculator named John Law to establish the Mississippi Company for investment in the French territory of Louisiana and the Bank Royal to issue notes and